Good afternoon. We are going to get started now. I want to introduce you to our two presenters. This is Lee Wen. He is a graduate of RIT with multiple degrees, or is that your master's?
Master's, I'm doing the PhD now. So,
okay,
yeah,
all right, so doctoral student at RIT. And this is Dr. Evan Doherty. Evan is a professor at EMU in the ethics department. And together they are going to lead us through what's kind of a dialogue discussion of AI and ethics. So I'll hand it over to them.
Thank you, Darcy.
Yeah.
So thanks for the introductions. I think we wanted to do a little more sort of introductory discussion. Thank you. Thank you for coming. We wanted to discuss AI and ethics today. We had a slideshow that was, as Lee put it earlier, non-essential.
Yeah.
So if we don't get it, that's fine. It was really just a couple of heading topics, and then we want to open up for questions at the end. But first, Lee, you wanted to get sort of a sense of things.
Yeah, I just want to get a feel for the room. So when people think of AI, how many people have like a concrete thing you see in your head when I say AI? Anyone? No? Do you think like Terminator? No? Or do you think like Alexa, right? Yeah, Alexa. Okay, how many people think that AI is a good thing? How many people? Yeah? Okay. How many people think it's a bad thing? Both? Yeah. Most of you, it depends.
You can't
right?
raise your hand twice.
Yeah. Well, you can give the balance view. We'll accept that. So in this talk, I'm an AI research scientist, and we have an ethicist. So I'm going to kind of handle the science side of like, here's what AI is, and then I'm going to pass it off to Evan, and he's going to talk about like what it means, what are the ramifications. So first, I want to start off just with a general introduction of like what is AI, what should you be thinking about. And really, what I want you to think about when you think about AI is a machine that learns patterns. Because right now, we're in the big data industry right now. Data is the most valuable thing on the planet right now. And it's because we can use that data to do stuff. And one of the things we can do with data is we can show it to a computer and have the computer and the program learn the patterns in that data to either make predictions or to classify things. Everyone, you have your phone on you, and you might notice that when you type things, it's trying to predict the next word in your sentence. And basically, that's just AI we taught on a bunch of lines of language, and then it learned the patterns in the language. And as you type, it knows in a general sense what next word should come, right? Also, you might see AI in like when you're browsing the internet, you get these targeted ads because they're taking your data of where you're looking, and they're like, oh, you'll probably want this next. So just think about AI as, okay, it's taking our data and it's learning the patterns in it. That's why I can learn language. That's why I can learn how to classify things. So now that you have a good kind of vision of like, this is what AI is, I'm going to hand off to Evan, who will talk about AI and ethics.
I'm not going to be able to cover it all. It's very complex, of course. I mean, just like these large language machines are covering just heaps and heaps and heaps of data in short time. Guess what? The ethical implications are layered, but they're not impossible to address, and we should probably take them a few at a time, which is what we'll do together today. We'll look at a few specific areas like education, creative arts, and maybe sort of the notion of labor in general, and then we'll talk about some regulations. But just off of what Lee was talking about, when we have these predictive, it sort of guesses what you want to buy next. How many people like that? Yeah. So it can be a good thing, right? It can be a good thing. It can be useful. It can make things efficient. How many people don't like it? I'm guessing there was more of those. Yeah. Well, there's an uneasiness that I think some people have about this, and I think that uneasiness is not an ethical thing, but it can sometimes point to them, or at least it points to, let's ask what's going on here. Why don't I like something is an important question, right? And asking whether it should be, whether it's just me. I talked with Kelly earlier, who said, I don't want to be a Luddite, and I thought, I think I kind of want to be a Luddite. So is it just me, right? Or is there something there about that unease, right? So this question about surveillance and privacy is, I think, an ethical concern. Is this a violation? Do we have agency to say, I don't want you to track every purchase I have? And so, they've had some regulations around this, like the cookies. You can say, no thank you to the cookies. You have to have the ones that make it work, and even that makes some of us Luddites feel uncertain. But the real question here is, as Lee was saying, this is already here. It's already happening. It is happening at an alarming rate of late. And so these questions are extremely present, right? And then the big ethical question, I think, is always, should the world be like this? How should the world be, as opposed to the world is like this, right? So that question about what can we do with AI, whether it's from the sort of industry point of view or the user end point of view, it's also a question I think that we should be asking, what should we be doing with this? How should we proceed? And we'll get to this at the end when we talk about regulations. We'll talk about a few pitfalls on the way. So we're going to start with education. That's an easy one, right?
Yeah, easy, right? Yeah, so AI and education. So we've had this revolution with ChatGPT coming out. We have these large language models that basically what we do is we scrape the entire internet. It's like, several trillion lines of language. It's all publicly available text on the internet. And then we train an AI to understand that. And it ends up, picking up a large number of patterns, and it's very impressive what it can do. It can make things that sound very human-like, but it doesn't mean that it's factual. So when we first need to talk about that these things are not infallible. They have what we call hallucinations, because we call it that because they don't really lie, but they don't always tell the truth, because sometimes they don't pick up on the right patterns. Or there's not enough patternicity that it's seen that it's all it's trying to do is it's generating a sentence, it's trying to predict what the next word is in that sentence, but sometimes it's like, oh, this is the most confident thing I have in the sentence, and I have like a 49% confidence that's the next word in the sentence, but that's the most confident thing I have of all words I could choose, and so that's what I'm going to say. And we see this coming out that it's pretty good at mimicking human language, so that you have students that are using it to write essays for them or to help them write essays, right? That's probably a problem, because we want them actually thinking and doing the work. We don't say, hey, ChatGPT, give me an essay about the Roman Empire. I need it to be 4 pages. Please generate it for me. But there are other good uses where it can be used as a sounding board or as kind of like a conversational partner. And we can say, like, do you think this sentence sounds good when I write about the Roman Empire? And that model has probably seen every sentence ever written about the Roman Empire that humans have generated. So it can actually tell you if it fits, within that scope. Also, teachers are starting to use AI as well, because it can be a good teaching aid where you have an AI, let's say, and you train it off of every single math test ever. So it knows what math looks like, and it knows the structure of a math test. So a teacher can say, like, okay, I'm writing this math test, give me a calculus 1 question or something, and then it can generate the calculus 1 question for them, and they can review it and say, is this a good question to give to students? So it is on both ends, on the student perspective and on the teaching perspective, AI is being used. And the thing we need to worry about, which Evan will get into, is like, is it going to be factual? It's going to be teaching students, the right thing, because it's not always like right. And for teachers, that's also a problem, because if they're using it to generate tests, they don't want to educate their students. So I'll have Evan pick up from here.
So yeah, you mentioned this term hallucination. So just to be clear, this is sort of like a term of art, right? That means in AI, when the language machine produces a sentence that is not factual. Why does it do this? Because, as Lee said, it's just going for the most plausibly good next word in a sentence, or the most plausibly good sentence in a paragraph. I assume it goes like that as well. We always talk about words, but of course they're putting them together into sentences. So for the obvious reasons, for students, this is not really helping, right? Even if they're using them as this sort of learning tool. So there's a worry here. Of course, these machines are learning at a ridiculous rate, so maybe that hallucination worry will be cleared up by this afternoon, but I don't know.
Right.
But yeah. as it stands, it's an issue. There's also, I think, maybe a sort of so there's a couple of issues. There's this idea of plagiarism, right, with students claiming that I wrote this when really ChatGPT wrote it, or or they stole it from somewhere else. I used to be able to just put into Google a line that looked a little too good, a little too well written, right? And then it'd be like, oh, well, it comes from that paper. So, busted kind of a thing. But you can't really do that anymore. Yeah, so that's an issue. And there's, I think, another sort of underlying question about, well, what does learning become? What do we value here in terms of education, in terms of learning? And I think that that's a really important question that we're going to be grappling with. I don't think that that's an easy answer, but I do think that probably some of what I think are the best answers to this is the approach should be to figure out what these machines can do well and figure out how to use them as tools. And so does this mean that some things that we used to think were sort of purely human and we really valued them as such, we maybe have there's something else there, right? There's something else that's, I don't know, genuine, authentic. There's something else we value besides a computer being able to guess the most plausible next word, even though maybe that's kind of what we've done ourselves as humans, right? So how much time do we have left for discussion on education in particular? Okay, yeah. I was kind of leaning that way, so I wanted to see if I was going to jive with our clock. So this is my segue into sort of the creative arts. There's this talk about, well, geez, they can make these really beautiful paintings. There was an AI did a painting that won an award not too long ago, very recently, and apparently it's quite nice. I haven't seen it myself, right? And so you're like, well, geez, what do we value? I thought creativity was uniquely human. I thought that was one of the things that made us special. And we want to be special, and I think we are, right? So I'm not saying we have to give up on being special, but what is it about us that's special is kind of interestingly in question. So with creativity, when it comes to writing or visual arts or these sorts of things, and one of the things about visual arts is it does seem that humans, maybe this is yours, Lee, you want to take the idea of how AI does art and then liken it to the creativity of the human.
Yeah, so how AI art is generated is like anything AI does, is we feed it a million human paintings, right? And so it starts to pick up the patterns in how, humans create art, which is kind of like a question of well, we think it's super creative, but it turns out that there are latent patterns within art that we do. So then it's taking these million examples and it's finding a equation that can basically guess what the next art piece should be. And it basically does this on a pixel by pixel basis, where it's okay, based off of the million pieces of art that I've seen and analyze it pixel by pixel, in this image, what is the next pixel that I should generate? And it generates pretty profoundly unique art pieces that are winning awards. They're pretty much indistinguishable from some human paintings. And there's a real ask about well, is it plagiarizing? Because it is taking human art and it's making more art with it, and we're not asking the artist, right? But if you have an art student who's learning from art that's already done, and that's how they learn art, and then they produce more art, right? They're not directly taking the art and remaking it, but it is kind of the ideas of that art is in their scheme. And that's analogous to how AI does art, because it's not directly taking this part of the picture and copy and pasting it. It's learning based off of the art that I've seen, what should the next piece of art look like. So it's not a direct one-to-one. So how do we kind of disentangle that from, well, we don't like computers making art, but it's learning art in learning how to recreate art in a similar way that a person would do it. So I'm going to hand it back to Evan to answer some of these questions.
Oh, to answer these questions, thank you.
Yeah.
So that question of plagiarism is an interesting one because, and it was compelling to me the first time I thought about that, this idea that, oh, well, you just go through and you take all the Picassos and all of these, and then you sort of, crumple it up and spit back something that looks really good and wow, who did that? A computer just did that by chewing up the internet? That just seems somehow empty and lacking, right? But then you think, all right, you got an art student, you see them in the museums, they go with their sketchbooks, they sit there and they practice and then they produce this, and maybe they even produce it with a digital tool, right? So the difference there seems more and more slight, and I think, again, this brings us back to this deeper question. ethically, the question ethically, I think about just taking, as I think, I'm going to borrow from something that Lee and I talked about before that Lee said was, it's not like the program or an artist is necessarily taking a chunk of a piece of art and like fitting it here, right? It's learning about what art does and the patterns of such, and then going forth, right? So art student does that, AI does that. So it's not, I think, strictly plagiarism in that sense, but I think it does raise these questions, again, not easily answered, and I'm not here to necessarily answer them, but to raise them and try to think through them with you, hopefully, later today. But about what is it about that creativity? So we used to think language was so like the thing that made humans really cool and interesting, and then we realized, wait, a lot of animals use language. We just ignored it for a long time. Oh, maybe humans and animals are a little bit closer than we used to think in terms of that thing that makes us like languagey, right? And then these language machines are like, we can do it too. Like, oh, okay, well, but what about creativity? Maybe that's what's uniquely human, right? So I think this is the sort of existential crisis that that this kind of thing is kind of opens up, right? But I'm a little scared by it, frankly, you know. But I'm ready to face it. Also, I don't know. Maybe that's my training as a philosopher. Is be like, weird and wild. Let's go. But so for the creative arts, I'm trying to remember if there's some other aspect. Lee, can you jump into
there's something that I think we value just latently about like the humanness of art, like the skill and the talent that goes into making it. So a good analogy here is, computers have been beating us in chess since the 90s, right? Like very rudimentary machines can beat us in chess. But we still have professional chess players, and we still like to watch them. We still pay them a lot. So even though there's this like chess is like the solved thing because of computers, we still have people that we want to be good at chess. So I don't think artists are really going anywhere because it's not just the end product we appreciate. We appreciate the person, going to art school, developing their own sense of style with their art, and like they usually work themselves into it, and that's when they put on the campus, and we like to see that, and we like the story and the person behind it, not just like the end product.
Yeah, that was exactly what we were missing.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And this is true of lots of things. Like a forgery. Why do we not? What's so bad about a forgery? If it's a really good one, but then you find out, oh, the Vermeer that hangs over my fireplace is actually a forgery, I value it less. And so does the market, frankly, right? Why? Because of that story that's now missing, right? It's the wrong story or something, right? So, but this is still a question. I think this just kind of gets us a layer below to start asking, well, what is it about it that making it an actual Vermeer that makes it better? Why do we value that? We do, it seems, in fact, right? But so I want to keep asking those questions.
So it's probably time to move on to the next topic, right?
Yeah, if you could just calm our fears about the future of labor in the next.
Oh, yes. Yes. And then we can wrap up.
Future labor, yeah. Yeah, so I'll start off with kind of how AI is being used in the labor force. So like as I said, that there are these pattern recognizing machines, right? And I think we call this the AI revolution we're in right now, because AI is popping up everywhere. It's being used to make these jobs. But this isn't the first industrial revolution we've had, right? Like we made the cotton gin, we made the steam engine, and now we have this AI thing. But it seems a lot spookier than the invention of the steam engine, right? But I was thinking, like, why is that? So, we can think of AIs as a tool, but it's not exactly like, a hammer where, you wield a hammer and it does something for you, it helps you with a task. We're now trying to create tools that are replacing us. And not just replacing us, they're replacing jobs that took expertise. So one example of this is we've taught an AI to identify tumors in x-rays. So it looks at an x-ray of, like, let's say someone's lungs, and it says, okay, I see a tumor in there, and I can identify exactly where it is. And it turns out it's a lot better than people, because it's literally looking at these x-rays pixel by pixel and can find like the group of 4 pixels in that image that identify a tumor, rather than asking a technician who would have to look at it and think about it, and sometimes they miss things because we're not literally looking at pixel values.
And also the data set that it's
Yeah, it's
working
trained on
from is
millions and
every
millions.
picture
It's seen
ever,
like every
and-
X-ray on the internet that has a tumor in it and a tumor without it. So the amount of data it has is like unfathomable to like even a doctor maybe has only seen thousands of images, but now this thing has seen millions of images. And so now we're not just replacing something like putting something in wood like a hammer. We're replacing a job that takes expertise. Like someone who's an X-ray technician had to go to school, they had to do their residency, and now we're like, oh well, an AI does your job, so sorry. So I think that's part of the existential threat on the labor force. Is like, well, now it's not like, well, we think, okay, we just developed tools, but it's okay because I'm knowledgeable, right? You can't replace me with a hammer. But now it's like, well, now we're making hammers that can now replace people's expertise. So, what does that mean?
To me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, the hammer analogy is an interesting one, right? Because you think about like robotics, say on an assembly line or something, and that's replacing real people with jobs and also expertise and experience. I'm not talking about necessarily unskilled labor even, but when it comes to things that maybe takes lots of schooling and years of experience to be the best in the field, and then to find that a program can actually do it 1,000,000 times in a second or something, and you're like, wow. Now, here's a boon, I think. I think this is a benefit to be able to look at and read imagery to find tumors. Wouldn't we all want that to be as good as possible, right? Now, obviously, if the thing is hallucinating and giving you false claims, because
Right.
then, we need to worry about that failure aspect.
Yeah.
But I think there's an interesting ethics question here, I think. One of the things about decision making in humans is that we are fallible, right? And we know this, and we are sympathetic to it because we are too, right? And we connect, we understand. There's something about that is forgivable because I'm one too. If the computer makes a mistake, curse that stupid machine, right? So, I'm sorry? Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Right. But I think this is an interesting point when if we put things in the hands of AI, say, to make a decision or make a call, whether it's in medicine or autonomous cars,
Yeah.
and if something goes wrong, then we have this idea that it should have been infallible, and now that it's wrong, burn it to the ground, right?
Right.
And so it's kind of a two-sided coin there, right? We are very unforgiving of something. We also consider it should be perfect, but we know it's fallible because it's reflecting us.
Yeah.
Frankly, it only has the data set that it has, and we only have the knowledge we have so far, and it's trading on that, right? So again, I'm offering another question more than here's the answer. Number 4 is all the answers.
Yeah.
And so I think that idea of the fallibility of humans and how it's forgivable, sometimes it's not, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't mean to say it's always forgivable, but I mean it can be, whereas with machines, it's like it's unforgivable. And I think that's an interesting point when we talk about, like Lee and we've talked about autonomous cars and the decision making. They are going to be so much less likely to cause accidents, at some point, not too far
Yeah.
off.
Because you think about the
And yet we don't
biggest-
want
yeah.
it, because if it makes one lousy mistake, I'm done, right?
Yeah.
Buy an autonomous car?
But
No, exactly. Yeah. Go ahead, Lee. Or,
do you want to answer some questions, or do we want to finish and then?
please, go ahead.
What media are there and what reporters in media who know something about this, in your guys' opinion, and are reporting on it now or will be reporting on it? The media are writing all writing about AI, but I don't know how to judge whether this is somebody that really knows it or are there people you could recommend?
Well, in media, they yeah.
So the question was, who in the media is, and I'm assuming you mean like journalists, yes, particularly not the experts being interviewed, but the journalists themselves that are up to snuff when it comes to this discussion, that are grasping it and reporting honestly.
Yeah, so media is very good at picking out the flaws and the fail points of AI because that's very sensational and that's a story that sells really well. Like we were talking about, like yesterday, there was a story someone asked, like Alexa, was the 2020 election stolen? And it said, oh yes, without a doubt, it was
Massive
stolen.
election fraud, it reported, because it picked up on something it had scraped, which was a piece of garbage, but it was there, so it used it. And then later I saw this, and I asked mine, I said, was the 2020 election stolen? And it said, I can't speak to that.
They patched that very quickly.
But this is an ethical question. I'm sorry, we're not actually answering your question, but we'll get to it. This is another ethical question, right? When we say we worry about facial recognition being very white and very American. We worry about culture being very white and very American. Why? Because that's what's there for it to scrape and fill with its coffers. I'm sorry, I keep dropping the mic. And then the secondary worry is, to fix that, you give it a patch, and it says, don't do that. Oh, don't say that about X. That you're generalizing and being prejudiced and showing a bias that exists, but it shouldn't exist. So there's that ethical question. It is, but it shouldn't be. And then what does the thing do? It says, okay, I just won't talk about that anymore, which is erasing people now.
Yeah.
So, this is tricky. This is tricky.
Yeah, like what if you're querying an AI about a controversial topic, and basically the hammer approach to that is like, just don't talk about controversial topics, right? And now you're actually biasing the information you get.
Yeah.
So to
fix those biases is not an easy thing. This is a very complicated question, and a very important one ethically. In terms of journalists, I think what I trust are the researchers who know and are being interviewed. So the journalist is, in this case, bringing experts to the fore more than the journalist in particular. So I don't have anyone. You just asked for I don't have anyone in particular. Like, go read this person.
Yeah, I would say any article that is referencing academic literature, or if they went and interviewed an academic, is going to be your best bet, because this is now so technical of a problem. You really need to start asking people who are at the forefront of this technology. Yeah, good question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Flawed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But who treats me, who is a human, it's not a robot puppy, or a robot, looks lovely, or
Yeah.
nothing like
Yeah.
a human child or a human care worker. I wish there was a way we could pay human care workers as much as we pay doctors. Because they are so human and so involved, and they're like a friend, and they are friends. And I can't imagine making a friend out of a robot.
Yes, and I think this segues into our last discussion about regulation, right? We know AI is here, we know we're using it, but how and what should we rein in on this technology, right? And I'll spoil this, that the industry is not going to regulate itself. They're making so much money off of this. Like ChatGPT was the fastest growing thing ever on the internet, and after it released, every big tech company was like, that made a ton of money, we should do that. And it's projected to make just hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars off of this, and there's really no incentive for them to be self-regulating. Like, let's say you had ChatGPT and it gave you like a confidence score on like, do I think this answer is correct? I think their profit margin would just get destroyed, right?
If it said,
right?
if it said this is probably right, we'd all be like, oh, ChatGPT is crap.
Yeah,
but
like,
it says very confidently this, and then the idea of it going into other industries, like your concern, right?
Yeah.
Well, where else can we put this? And so you mentioned, I don't want a robot dog companion. Do you remember the Woody Allen movie with where he goes into the future? I don't know, what was it called? I just remember there was a little robot dog that was just awful. It was the whole movie's about how awful it's going to be, right? And I think there's this idea that if it's in everything, then that's awful. If it's in some things and we're careful about it, then it could be wonderful, right? Like discovering tumors. But what is it about the care that you are interested in a human for? Mm-hmm. And I think that it's that word care, in fact, right? There's something genuine about the care that we have amongst our fellow humans and that we give back and forth. I teach medical ethics amongst a bunch of other applied ethics. And so, this is something that we can we can do what I call sort of good doctoring, means that care is actually first and foremost. Prolonging life, reducing pain, all of course is part of that profession, but it's not secondary in a sense, but it is to be done along with care. Otherwise, we're doing it wrong. And sometimes we can't prolong life, and sometimes we can't reduce pain, but we can always offer care, right? And where does care come from? It's not a program. That seems somehow different, right? This seems like something that comes from a life lived amongst humans as a human. And there's something genuine and authentic that's required for that. But we have to make these arguments as clear as possible and get ahead of it. So we're talking about regulation.
Yeah.
Not going to be self-regulated. There's a question of agency here too, right?
Yes.
Do I want to have you track my purchases, or do I want to have this be what cares for me in medicine going forward? If I don't have that choice, if it's just you've got a choice between a robot dog and a robot child, that's not okay, right? That's
Right.
We need regulation to say that's not okay.
And another aspect of regulation is, like I said, a good use of AI is like, okay, it can identify tumors, and using the same kind of pattern recognition, we've also seen it try to identify other things. So like Amazon created an AI to skim through resumes that were incoming, because they have thousands and thousands of resumes submitting to them every day. So like, yeah, we can create a bot trained off of the current Amazon employees, and it'll just find the next person who matches, what the current employees look like. You know what happened? It ended up filtering out all woman applicants, because the data it was trained on, that men are very overrepresented in tech. So it only saw resumes that were from men, so it learned the pattern of women are anti-correlated as good Amazon workers, right?
And there's that question of how the world is and how the
Yeah.
world ought to be.
Right.
And
Because
it doesn't make that second distinction
they're
at
just
all.
extending patterns already existed in the world, right? So if there is a negative pattern in the world, it's going to extend that as well. So really, when we look at this regulation, we need to think about the biases that we have and what we're teaching these machines. So they had to go back in. They got like tons of lawsuits about this. They had to go back in and balance the resume pool, so it actually had a fair assessment when looking at resumes. And we see these biases also in language models. Like these language models, they can't understand and not good at repeating minority dialects. Like even in like English in America, like these speech recognition technologies, they can't understand like a African American like verbalization, right? And also, even when it comes to AI art, we find Western patterns when it generates art. So someone wanted to generate a African tribe for me, and everyone had this big white American smile, and and like, yeah, that's not something. Yes.
AI
art.
Yeah,
art.
art from that. Yeah, generated from.
So yeah, when I think about regulating AI, we need to we need to regulate the data that's going into it, because we can't just say, okay, just throw all existing data at it and have it go, because then all the biases in your existing data. And we also need to regulate the use case, because some of these places, like we were saying in like personal care, we don't want to replace people with AI, because like we're losing a humanness to it. And so I think in thinking about basically the training data and the applications, we need to structure some sort of legislation to rein it in, because like, of course, Amazon wanted an AI to filter out the resumes. That saves them from hiring a person to do it, but then it was just catastrophic. So, yeah, something to think about.
Do you think that these regulations could have the potential to keep up with the advancement in AI and technology in that?
Way behind.
We're already
So catch up is the first, right? Yeah. I mean, great question.
How many of our
because-
legislators understand what the internet is? Yeah.
I think that the problem that AI has just created like a tipping point, that the problem in regulations was well before that. I mean, whether you're worried about Meta tracking you or whatever, Europe has implemented GDPR, we're way behind. I think they did that 5 years ago, where you can just call up Facebook and say, I want all my data flushed, and by the way, provide me the data that you have on me. The US, it's like, no, we don't want to be regulated, just take all.
Yeah, Europe
Right.
is way ahead of us on that, on data privacy and right to the information you generate, because they're making a lot of money off of the information you generate. They're using it, and they're not telling you they're using it. So,
This is that question of agency again, and there is just recently I have it on my laptop. It's useless to us now. But there is a Biden administration, very recent, like, code of ethics kind of proposal, and there's a healthy chunk on this question of agency, and so catching up, right, to people who've been doing it better for a while. I mean, hey, try harder, I think, right? Don't give up just because we haven't succeeded yet.
It is an
let's not
extension
stop.
of the negative social impacts of technology. Like, we're already seeing huge ramifications of just the internet and social media, and we're not even caught up to dealing with that. So now AI is an extra level on top of that,
Yeah,
affecting our
yeah.
lives, right? Question in the back.
That's you, yeah.
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 Thank you for the interesting discussion. We began with the word Luddite, and I think it's worth bearing in mind that the original Luddites, if I'm not mistaken, were opposed to industrial-sized looms because they wanted cottage industry to be maintained, and so they went into the factories of northern Britain and broke up looms. Well, where would we be today without industrial production of textiles? I think that's a worthwhile corrective to think about. But that wasn't my main point.
I love that point, though.
Yeah,
Thank you for that.
It's a good point, though.
Yeah.
No, I want to reveal my own naivete and draw on that. As most people here know, I'm a faculty member at one of our nearby institutions of higher learning, and I spent last semester teaching a couple of courses and dealing with some incompletes and stuff, where I was getting all these very strange answers. And it shows you how old I am, that it wasn't until I put in all my grades that I realized that I shouldn't probably have been spending hours and hours and hours re-watching films to find that scene that some student had described that I was sure wasn't in it. Reference, in some text that I'd assigned. Where does this come from? I must have misremembered, so I was going to read it again. Of course, I was absolutely idiotic, and it was only when all my grades were in that I thought, oh, AI, of course. And that story, by the way, is being reproduced across campuses everywhere.
Yeah.
But one of the things that you said, and this is my main point, sorry for all the words, I thought was very interesting about the production of art, but I think it also applies to, for example, what our students are doing. The key here is to think about process. And as someone who teaches literature, I'm always teaching about how a book comes into creation. What were the drafts? How did this, why did the author include this chapter but cut that chapter? Or why did the poet change these words? And if we think about process, it seems to me that we're putting humanity back into it. If I'd asked my students, as I believe my colleagues in maths do, how did you get to this answer? Then suddenly things become much better, and we're going to have to think of ways to do that.
So I have a question for you. Do you think there is a place in that process for AI? Like,
I think definitely, and that's the real grey area, because I work in an area where most of my colleagues are not native speakers of English. They love AI for making their memos and their syllabi, clearer. You don't get, stylistic clashes or grammar clashes. Why shouldn't our students use these things too? But what we're going to have to ask for, just as we're going to have to ask about works of art, and just as we should always ask about works of art when we are looking at a painting, reading a poem, looking at a novel, looking at a film, or whatever, how did we get here? Instead of focusing purely on the product, the question of how we get there is what reveals the most important human elements, it seems to me.
Yeah. I like that question very much. Thank you. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and the remember the Writers Guild just settled their strike. One of their main issues was, how is AI going to be in the future? And it cannot be that they just take scrape all the Scorsese scripts or whatever. I'm just saying this, and make the next one and put it out there. And so, yeah, and I think too, people who teach English are know about writing and the process of writing are uniquely positioned to see what ChatGPT isn't doing well, right? Like, what is the magic of writing? It isn't just guessing the next probable word, right? So yeah, but there's other hands, so I'm not going to but thank you for that, yes.
I'm going to have you take the two questions kind of back to back, and then you can answer those,
And then we'll break?
But I'd love to hear the two, and then you guys can respond.
Okay.
I understand that there's a system coming out called Gemini, and I think that's by Google, if I'm not mistaken, by one of those biggies. And this Gemini is combining
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be out by Christmas, this Christmas.
Okay.
Yeah, and then wait, hold on, let's get one more just
Yep.
because it's related. I saw one other hand. Mary?
Okay, well, my question goes way back to one of your very first statements. 20 years ago, I was working at the university at an administration level. At least more than 20 years ago. I was working there 20 years before that. And I overheard a teaching assistant talking to another professor or somebody saying, I had this really great essay from somebody in my Persian class discussing something, and I found that essay on the computer last night. What do I do? So you seem to say we don't have that problem anymore, that a student can't say, I need to write an essay on such and such, but do you have any? And she basically copied it. It was a really excellent essay.
It just wasn't
Somebody
hers.
else had some-
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And so, but the words, the phrases, she copied it from that. And now you said that doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah.
Oh, no, no, no.
No,
No.
no.
My point was that I can check it. We're so aware of that happening that it's easy to detect. Except that now with ChatGPT, we're back to where did this come from? It's not from a paper. It's
Because it
from
is
all the papers.
original content,
Yeah.
but it's original content generated from what the AI has seen. So there's a new field of AIs to hunt down other AIs. Where so you like
Which sounds madness.
Yeah,
doesn't it?
right. Because like especially with like deep fakes and generating new voice and generating text. Now we're training AIs on the patterns that were generated by other AIs, so they can detect where it is.
So does that mean that professors or teachers, teaching assistants need to go every time with every paper and double check?
Well, it is in fact common practice to feed any papers through these systems that sort of check for originality and this sort of thing, but they're not good at detecting ChatGPT generated content. And I
'cause you
think
won't-
that's maybe
yeah.
one of the key terms, distinction between the machine and the human. Content, like our question before talked about, right? Just content, and that's one of those things that Writers Guild people talked about, was it's not content. That's a dirty word to a writer, right? It's what as you see the product of my creativity. It's not just filling the airwaves with content or filling the classroom with content, right? But there was a question about the Gemini thing, and I thought you maybe had something to respond.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
and was there one?
The systems are evolving to the point where they are going to be able to plan and reason, not just regurgitate all the stuff that's
So
into them and train. So, and this is like now.
yes.
Coming up right now, and it's just continually improving, like you said, at an incredible rate.
So as an AI scientist, when I hear someone say, I have an AI that can plan and reason, I have a very different take than just like taking that at face value, because I know the inner workings of AI, and really what I do 40 hours a week is I break AI and I see its limitations. So that's kind of where I differ a lot from the general public that just sees like, oh, AI is going to do all this thing. Like every day I have like, the AI can't do this, and that's why my job is hard, but that's also why I have a job. I wish I could just tell an AI, go do this thing, and it does it flawlessly, but they're very, very flawed systems. And like, for instance, I know why they're bundling up different AI systems, because if you look at ChatGPT, one thing it can't do is it can't do math. Because it has a language and predictive understanding. Like if you ask it what 1 + 1 is, it's trying to find a pattern in all the text it's seen where it sees the answer to that. It can't actually like do a computer thing. So a lot of times if you ask it
It
like
has to ask a calculator.
yeah. So we need these we call them like multimodal AI systems, where like maybe the front-facing thing is a language model where you ask it a question, but then it needs to understand and interpret and parse that question to send it to other AIs that are more specific. So like if you ask ChatGPT 1 + 1, it's like, oh, I'm not the model that can do this. I need to hand it off to the model that a calculator that can do this. Or if you ask it like, I need to know what's in this image, it's only a language model. So it's like, okay, I'm going to pipe this to an AI that actually interprets images. And the thing is, when you bundle all of these models together, you do get more modality in an AI system, but now you're also bundling together the flaws in each of those systems. So the language model is going to have its limitations. The math model is going to have its limitations. The image processing model is going to have its limitations. Now you put it all together and you hope that it works better than the sum of its parts. But that is yet to be seen. Like, you could have a problem in the language model that then goes and gives a problem to the math model, which has its own problem. So now you have problems stacked on top of problems. So
And one of the worries about these problems is that they're released and are available before some of these problems emerge, because a lot of these things have capabilities that the people who are making them don't understand.
Yeah.
And so they should be doing this sort of behind closed doors in locked cabinets before they let it out. And they're not.
yeah, like
So,
when
yeah.
Google released Bard, so they released their own language model, and then people saw it was getting these very basic questions wrong because they didn't test for it, and then the Google stock price just like crashed 20% in a week because people were like, oh, they gotta say that doesn't know anything. So then they had to go unrelease it, patch it up, and then re-release it. And the problem is with how cutting edge this technology is and how fast it's developing, it's a shoot first and ask questions later. Because, like, what if this is the best product and we're the first to get it out and we make $100 billion? And then, that's what they're thinking. They're not thinking, like, what if we release a broken thing and then, we have to, eat our hat for it.
And on a sort of nation state level, right, we don't want to have some other nation get out in front. So we're sort of like, we should regulate this, but we also have to let it go. There's a tension there, right? And I'm not so worried about bottom line harm. I'm a little more worried about, the harm to humans. Maybe as an ethicist, but I think also as a human.
Yeah.
But I think we need to maybe wrap up and.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I just wanted to thank you. I think peering in and merging your two fields is exactly the conversations we need to be happening. And I want to thank you for spending your time and you bring skill sets and knowledge and a way of thinking about things that no one else has. And so I appreciate you taking that time to be here and share it with us. I felt like I was peering into the most interesting conversation ever. Thank you all. I know I speak for the congregation when we thank you for your time here.
And thanks for hosting us as well, because, like, how many places are having these discussions? Like, you put a scientist and a philosopher in a room and had us go at it, right? So thanks.